Hey guys, I've been playing through the Shadowlands beta, and in preparation for the Shadowlands release, I wanted to bring you a guide on all the changes to Outlaw and how the spec is feeling. You know, Outlaw was kind of a niche spec for BFA. Niche, however you say that. And it was used primarily in Mythic Plus and AoE heavy raid encounters. Now, it has a very different play style compared to Sub and Assassination, but it really excelled in situations where you had multiple targets. You know, you could pop Blade Flurry, run in, and see all these big crits go flying. It was just a lot of fun to play. So its rotation was arguably more complex than its counterparts, you know, centering around combo point builders and Sinister Strike and pistol shot procs, and then combo point spenders like Between the Eyes and Dispatch. Now, when you pair this with Roll the Bones, it made for a very interesting rotation with a lot of decision making. So I played this spec primarily in BFA and really enjoyed it. It didn't necessarily thrive in a raid environment, but it was the go-to spec for Mythic Plus, and it just was a ton of fun to play. In BFA, the typical rotation was to open with Ambush, hit Blade Flurry if there was more than one target, and build combo points with Sinister Strike and Deadshot procs, making sure we don't overcap our combo points. And then we would use Roll the Bones as a finisher to get one of the good buffs, i.e. Broadside, Grand Melee, or Ruthless Precision. Now, if you didn't get one of the good buffs, and you didn't roll a 2 buff, then you would have to rebuild all your combo points and re-roll the bones until you did. After that, we would just try and build and spend as many combo points as possible, prioritizing Between the Eyes as our finisher over Dispatch. So, what has changed in Shadowlands? On to the topic of what this video is actually about. And so far in the beta, the biggest change that is impacting this Outlaw spec is the Aoe Cap, or the Cleave Cap, that they brought in for all the melee classes. Blade Flurry is now capped at 5 targets. So with Outlaw's cleave damage being massively nerfed, we no longer will be seeing big crits on 10 to 15 targets. You guys remember this? Yeah, this was a lot of fun. No more of this happening in Shadowlands. Another fundamental change that we are seeing to Blade Flurry is that it no longer has 2 charges. Instead, now it has just a flat 30-second cooldown. The good news is, Blade Flurry is still affected by Restless Blades. Now, if you don't know what Restless Blades is, it's a passive ability for Outlaw Rogues where finishing moves reduce the remaining cooldown on Adrenaline Rush, Between the Eyes, Blade Flurry, Grappling Hook, Roll the Bones, Sprint, and Vanish by 1 second per combo point spent. So essentially, the more 5 or 6 combo point finishers we use, the shorter the CDs will be on some of our more important abilities. So the next big change that we need to talk about is the rework of Roll the Bones. Roll the Bones is no longer a finishing move, and there's no more re-rolling your buffs. Instead, this ability will just give you 1 or 2 of the 6 buffs. You can also still roll a 6 buff, by the way. I've done it a couple times on the beta. But the ability now has a 45-second cooldown. And as I mentioned before, it is affected by Restless Blades. So I personally don't really like this change. You know, I much preferred the original design of this ability where you could, you know, kind of use your combo points as needed to re-roll if you wanted to. I like the decision making involved. I felt like it gave the spec a sense of identity and kind of added a skill cap to this spec a little bit. But one of the biggest issues I'm encountering with how this new design works is how many globals I'm having to hit before a pull. And this is especially true in dungeons or fights with multiple adds. Because if you're choosing Maldraxxus as your Covenant and running Serrated Bone Spike, which is going to be likely because of how strong it is compared to the other options, then before you even attack, you're going to want to hit Roll the Bones to get your buffs, use all 3 Serrated Bone Spike charges on the adds, and then hit Blade Flurry before you even attack a target. The other downside that I have noticed to this change is that frequently when in dungeons, while pulling small packs of adds, you can find yourself in a window where Roll the Bones is on cooldown and you don't have any buffs up because you're not given enough time to benefit from Restless Blades. So, because of these issues that I keep running into and how clunky this spec feels, you know, I just much prefer the original design. One other thing that I'd like to add is if you agree with me that Serrated Bone Spike feels a little awkward with this spec, then try out the Kyrian Rogue Covenant ability with Echoing Reprimand. I think that could be a solution here. Another big change that happened in Shadowlands is now all rogue specs have been given Slice and Dice as a baseline finisher ability. Yes, all specs. So Slice and Dice is back, guys. The talent for this ability has been replaced with just something else. I actually don't even know what it was, but the ability now synergizes with Grand Melee. So if you roll the Grand Melee buff from Roll the Bones and have Slice and Dice active, each combo point that you use as a finishing move with Grand Melee will add 2 seconds to your Slice and Dice buff. This is kind of handy because in certain situations, whenever you have Slice and Dice up and you roll Grand Melee, you can get that buff to like 2-3 minutes long. Like if you're really good at getting those finishing moves in there and, you know, plowing through your rotation, you can get a very long Slice and Dice buff up and not need to refresh it, you know, by using it on its own pretty much throughout an entire fight. Other changes that we're seeing, and another baseline finisher that we're getting back, is our old friend Kidney Shot. And then they also replaced Riposte with Evasion. So those are some defensive cooldowns. You know, we no longer have Riposte as an Outlaw Rogue. They just gave us Evasion. I don't know why they did that, but for whatever reason, they felt like Riposte needed to go. Outlaw also no longer has a stun from between the eyes, but instead now it gives us a 20% chance to crit against the target. So the stun was really beneficial. However, the one thing that I'm noticing with this Outlaw spec is that it's bringing, you know, a lot of CC into our kit anyway. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but Outlaw still has an instant stun with Gouge. And then when you pair that with Blind and Kidney Shot, we now have 3 forms of CC available to us. The only other changes that I didn't hit on yet would be that Adrenaline Rush has been taken off the GCD. Woo! Any ability to take it off the GCD is a good thing in my opinion. It doesn't really change how we use it, but, you know, it's still a nice perk. And then they also brought back the old rogue ability, Shiv. Now, this ability works differently depending on your spec, but for Outlaw, it does some damage, rewards a combo point, and then guarantees an application of whichever non-lethal poison you have applied. Oh, I forgot to mention that. That's like one of the biggest changes, is that all rogue specs now have access to poisons. Not just assassination, all rogue specs. So that's kind of cool. It synergizes really well with Slice and Dice, and I expect that little bit of extra damage we get from poisons to really kind of help us on the meters a little bit. So that's kind of a nice change as well. But back to Shiv. If you're using Shiv and you have crippling poison applied, then it's basically a guaranteed on-demand slow. Or if you're using mind-numbing poison, then that offers like a slower cast time for whichever target that you Shiv. So that's a really, really nice change. Well, that's pretty much it. You know, my conclusion about the spec, to be completely honest, is that I don't really like it that much. Outlaw was my favorite rogue spec in BFA, and in Shadowlands, the redesign, you know, kind of seems just like a worse variation of it, I guess. You know, I don't want to be negative, but unfortunately, it just, the spec feels kind of weird. When you add in the Covenant abilities, or if you're going to spec into Killing Spree and Blade Rush, on top of that, you know, the rotation just feels really clunky to me. There are a lot of buttons to push and a lot of cooldowns to track, so, you know, if that's your jam, then this spec could be what you're looking for. But I personally think some of these changes, you know, maybe came out of an attempt to make the spec more viable in a raiding scenario. You know, since it's going to be so difficult to change your Covenant ability in Shadowlands. You know, I'm not sure, but maybe that could be the idea here. But to end on a positive note, it doesn't feel as bad on the pre-patch. So I will be keeping an eye out for future revisions. But as it stands now, I'm more than likely going to be playing Sub or Assassination in Shadowlands. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see future videos on all things Rogue and Shadowlands, as well as future guides on WoW content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Peace.